Are you confident that Jameis can still be a starting quarterback?
No, and I haven't been for some time. If you recall, we had this debate like a year ago, and I thought they should move on from Jameis Winston, who people were hoping could be an MVP candidate like a year ago, because sometimes, 2 years ago, because sometimes it's hard to tell. And I was still open to him at that point, but he takes too many chances. He makes bad decisions. Forget about, for a second, the off-field stuff. The off-field stuff was so bad, you had to question whether you wanted him to be the face of your franchise. But listen, the reality of the NFL is if the guy can produce, people will have short memories. But the fact is he didn't, unless you consider production for both teams. As Stephen A. points out, it's a 7-9 team where the other team got 112 points off of his bad passes. Well, that's a big difference, right? I mean, let's not forget when Fitzpatrick took over a couple years ago, that offense looked unstoppable early, and he's no great shakes, but he's been a competent, or also a risk taker, by the way. Not a guy who protects the football, but an NFL starter at times, career backup / hey, if he's starting, it's not the end of the world guy. He's not all world, and that Bucs offense looked great with him in it for a while because it was like, oh, look what happens when a competent quarterback takes the reins of this offense. That has not been Jameis Winston. He has not been a competent starter. And if you do think he could be a starter, for which team exactly? Like, who's taking a chance? The typical bottom feeders, like really weak AFC East teams, the Jets, the Bills, they have quarterbacks they like who are young and ascending and already better than Jameis Winston. Miami is going to look for a real quarterback, maybe a guy like Tua or someone who can take the reins and not mess it up. I see Jameis as a backup, a strong-armed backup who can come in and throw some touchdowns and take some chances. I do not see him, Stephen A., as a guy who you want to give the reins over a full season to and say, here, take us there, because I don't think he can.
Well, first of all, it's difficult for me to defend a person that I think should have been Defensive Player of the Year, even though he was a quarterback, because he threw 30 interceptions, and his turnovers equated, like you said, to 112 points for the opposition. As far as I'm concerned, Jameis Winston should have walked up there as a quarterback on stage to accept Defensive Player of the Year honors, even as a quarterback, because that's how pathetic it was, even though he did throw for 5,100 yards and 33 touchdowns. Not to mention the fact that I don't want to hear from Chris Godwin or anybody else about coming to the defense of Jameis Winston. Here's the reason why. If you wanted to defend him so much, how come you didn't defend him to your own coach, Bruce Arians, who had no problem letting him go? Let's keep that in mind. Having said all of that, I will say this. Could he be a starting quarterback in the NFL? Yes, not just because of his ability. I remind you, Max Kellerman, Andy Dalton started games. Joe Flacco started games. Eli Manning, before he retired, started a whole bunch of games. We saw a few people, Mitchell Trubisky, starting games in Chicago. Everywhere you turn, not everywhere, but a lot of places you turn in the NFL, you see mediocrity. You see guys that may not make the mistakes that Jameis Winston make, but they also can't do the things positively that Jameis Winston can do. And so when you take that into consideration, I'd say, no, he's not a top 10, not even a top 15 quarterback. But in terms of being a starting quarterback for one of the 30 teams in the NFL, I think there are about 2 or 3 locations where, you could justify having Jameis Winston there compared to what you already have.
Yeah, as far as being a starting quarterback, could he be a starting quarterback in the NFL? Yeah. Could he be a winning starting quarterback, the kind of quarterback that you're not looking to replace? And in the scouting world, that's really how you separate them. You separate them from being all pros, the kind of guys who are top 5, top 10 in the NFL, solid starters who you're not looking to replace, starters you are looking to replace, and then backups. He's a starter you're looking to replace. I think that's his ceiling at this point in time as far as how people are going to look at Jameis. Here's the issue with Jameis Winston. And I don't know. Well, let me put it this way. Here's, I think, what Chris Godwin is trying to say about Jameis Winston. If you go back and you look at 2019 and just 2019, there's no question that Jameis was the victim in many cases of receivers dropping balls, getting tipped up in the air, and then the defensive back catches it. Wide receiver, quarterback not being on the same page. Look, you can see it. If you objectively look at it, you can see that it happened. But there are still way too many instances, both this year and in his history, where it's just a function of bad decision-making. Flat out bad decision making. So I can understand what Chris is saying. I don't know if Chris defended him to Bruce Arians or not. I will say this, though. In a league that is designed for parity and games are decided by 7 points or less, sometimes coming down to a field goal or an extra point miss or make, Jameis is a liability. There's no question about that. And he's going to have to really reevaluate where his career is heading at this point because the market's telling him. The market is speaking for him loud and clear about what people feel as though his future looks like as far as being a starter. And it's not pretty.
Well,
Louis,
I
for me
think,
personally,
there's a difference
when I see a guy running, I hold them accountable for guys running the wrong route or whatever. If you are a quarterback, like for example, Tom Brady signs with Tampa Bay, what's the one thing he requested? The phone numbers of all of his offensive players. You know his receivers. Why? Because he's going to go out there from tap the second he gets an opportunity to, and he's going to work with them and develop a relationship and a level of cohesiveness. So when I see that lacking on the football field, if I'm the quarterback, I'm the dude throwing the football. Tell me, Louis Riddick, before I go to Max, tell me one quarterback in this league that is a starting quarterback that can't pick up the phone to call his receivers to work out, and the receivers ain't going to show up. They're all going to show up because they know their future is riding on his productivity to them. So whatever's lacking, I'm looking at that quarterback because I'm saying something is missing, and you are responsible for it because you are the franchise quarterback. And we never saw that with Jameis Winston. So I hold him accountable for that.
No, you're right. I mean, look, ultimately the blame is going to rest and fall on the shoulders of the quarterback, just like the adulation actually, it always is heaped on the quarterback as well, and it's not deserved all the time. I'm just saying, though, look, no matter how many meetings you have, no matter how much time you spend in the offseason working with your wide receivers, no matter how many times you talk to them on the sideline. Look, we saw that this past year with Tom Brady. I mean, I'm sure Tom was putting in extra time with all of his receivers up there in New England, and Tom was talking to him on the sideline. He was yelling at him. He was encouraging him. He tried everything, and sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.